So if you guys clicked on this video, you're probably wondering how the heck can someone spend 40 hours detailing a little red car? Well, I'm going to tell you guys what I did and how long each step took in this video. All right guys, welcome to the channel. Hopefully you caught the full detailing series on this E46 ZHP, but if you didn't, all the links are in the description, all the products are in the description, and details are in the description. So yes, that's right, I spent over 40 hours detailing this little red car that I bought earlier this year. And I wanted to do a full recap of exactly what I did and exactly the products and how long each step took. Maybe that can help you guys if you want to do a full detail on your car, whether it's a small little car like this or a giant Raptor. You guys get to pick the methods and the intensity of what you'd like to use. Okay, so before you actually do anything, you have to decide what is the goal of the detail. And I know this is not like a hot thing to talk about, but for this car, it's a daily driver. And it's 17 years old, and I didn't think it was worth trying to get to like Pebble Beach standard. So you just have to decide how intense is this project going to be. So that's the first step. The first real step when I start doing the full detail is starting with the dirtiest surfaces first. So for me, I started with the engine bay, which took me about 2 hours. I foamed it, I rinsed it, I did the full process with my wheel brushes, and it took me a couple of hours to get done. Thankfully, there wasn't anything unexpected. It was mainly just surface dirt that had kind of just built up over the years, but it is a 17-year-old car, and the previous owner didn't really do much with the engine bay besides have it serviced. So it did need a few hours worth of attention. I also did some solution finish, trim restorer on some of the plastics because some of them were significantly faded, and I just picked, I just picked a couple areas that I felt needed it the most. The rest of it, I just used CarPro Pearl, which is one of my favorite dressings, just to make the plastics look nice and black, and then we moved on. So that took me about 2 hours. So the next step was the wheels, wheel wells, calipers, that whole thing. This took me way longer than anticipated. It took me about 8 hours. It took me almost an entire day to take the wheels off, clean them. It took me like 5 applications between the Adams heavy duty wheel cleaner, the Terminator, and just getting the old wheel weight remnants off this car. If you have a new car or you have new wheels, obviously you're not going to probably spend 8 hours on this, but for me, I had a lot of work on my plate for the wheels. Also, keep in mind, I did clay the wheels, and I also did do a wheel coating. I used Geon rim on the wheels as well. It's going to be driven in all seasons, so I just figured going forward it'd be nice to have some protection on the wheels when I clean them. So the wheels, 8 hours, really a stinger, not fun, but it's just a necessary thing. But I will say, wheels really do make or break a car. They're in really nice shape, they're cleaned up, they're coated, they're looking good. The car really looks a lot better, so it does give it that sort of finishing pop, and 8 hours is kind of a stinger, but it was worth it. Okay, so now that we've cleaned the dirtiest surfaces first, I do a full wash and then jump into the decontamination. So that step I count kind of as one wash / decontamination, about 3 hours for this car. Wash took me at least an hour. I want to make sure I get the jams really good, all the crevices really good, any sort of weird areas that stuff can build up in that you may not be focusing on during a normal wash. That's when you want to spend the extra time. So the soap I used for the wash was the Obsessed Garage decontamination soap. It's a little more aggressive, and it's kind of made to break down more dirt and potential sealants, any light sealants on the surface. So after I did that, I jumped right into the decontamination, which was the iron remover. That removes the iron particles that are stuck on the surface. And oh my God, the rear of this car really needed that. So the back of the car, which is pretty common, had a lot of embedded iron particles. You spray it on, you rinse it off, and you're good to go. After the iron removal, I used a clay bar, traditional clay bar, because I'm an old school guy, especially on a smaller car. The clay is just easier to maneuver for me. Clay bar. So the lubricant I used was actually Adams car shampoo diluted in just a spray bottle, and it works perfectly as a clay lube, and it's great, it's cheap, and most people have it around. So perfect. Clay bar definitely needed clay. As you guys can imagine, 17-year-old car hasn't been fully detailed very frequently, so it needed a clay bar. After you're done, rinse it off, make sure the car is dry. That whole process took me about 3 hours. So the next step, not as fun, but definitely necessary, is sort of the prep / inspection / test spot. You need to make sure the car is fully dry. If you can, dry out the jams, dry off the plastics, the windows, all that stuff. And you'll have to tape the surfaces you don't want to get polish on. So obviously the bumper and any sort of headlights or any areas that you're worried about hitting with the polisher or getting polish on, you need to tape off, especially if it's rubber or plastic trim. So once you do your test spot, it's going to depend if you are trying a few things that don't work that well or work and result in the way you want it to. Obviously that's going to take longer, but if you have an idea of what you'd like to do and it worked well, then that's great. You spend less time. So all in the prep / test spot, it's at least an hour, maybe 2, depending on how successful you are. Okay, so this is the most vigorous step, which is the compounding step. It is the most time intensive, labor intensive, and your body is gonna hate you after you do this. If you're like me, you don't really do this that frequently, because I just really polish my own cars. I don't really do other people's. I'm not doing it on a weekly or daily basis. So the compounding for me took about 14 hours. You might be saying, how is that even possible? You just have a polisher and you're moving it around. Well, it's not that simple. And if you cheat on compounding, it's very obvious, even to the untrained eye. Because especially with this car, it has 17 years of scratches and swirls. Compound I used was the Sonax Cut Max, pretty aggressive, but anything else just wasn't aggressive enough for this car. And in fact, I had to use something a little more aggressive in a couple areas. The pad I used was the microfiber cutting pad. That is one of my go-to pads, and I actually really like working with microfiber. So after compounding, you're like, oh my God, I'm done, that's great. Well, no. Next step is polishing. And thankfully polishing is much quicker. I budgeted about 7 hours for the polishing, so pretty much an entire day. It takes a while, but as you notice from the numbers, it's about half as much time as the compounding. And that does make sense in a lot of ways because you're doing a lot less work, and really you're just kind of jeweling up the paint and removing any haze, removing any sort of maybe leftover scratches, any sort of very, very light defects and haziness will be removed with the polishing. So it's a lot nicer once the car is polished. The clips I'm inserting, of course, you can see the difference in clarity and depth and just overall appearance of the car. The color is just so much nicer with the polishing being done. So I use the Sonax Perfect Finish with a yellow pad. Very popular combination at this point, and there's a reason for it. It does a little bit of work, but it also finishes extremely nice. So definitely recommend that. Worked really well on this car. Okay, so this is a step that I actually didn't even include, and it is the wipe down / prep step before you use your protection. I use CarPro Eraser, wipe down the car with a nice microfiber. Don't add any extra scratches in the car after you just polished it for God knows how long. So you need to wipe the car down, make sure there's no dust. I know some people wash the car after, but I usually don't. I just do a thorough wipe down. That takes at least an hour just to do that, remove the tape, get all that stuff squared away before you use your protection. So the next step is protecting the car. What do you want to use? Sealant, ceramic coating. I ended up going with G-Technic, Crystal Serum Light, and 2 layers of the XO V4. So that is a G-Technic line that is sold from Matt at Obsessed Garage, link in description. Works really well. I budgeted about 3 hours for that. You might be saying, wow, 3 hours for a ceramic coating, that takes a really long time, or you really suck, or you're really slow. Well, each layer takes almost an hour. You have to apply it, remove it, level it, make sure there's no excess, go back with the light. Sometimes I check sections 2, maybe even 3 times, and you might think that that's a waste, but the last thing I want to do is deal with an area or an edge or a corner that I didn't do well enough, and there's a splotch that you can't get out. And I don't want to polish it again. There's polishing dust and there's this whole mess. It's better to spend an hour extra or whatever. You're already in this so many hours. You might as well just do it right. Go back, check your work, get your detailing light. It takes 3 hours. You know, you just have to suck it up, I guess. That's what I did. So 1 coat of the G-Technic Crystal Serum Light, super easy to apply by the way, although it does take a little bit of time. And then 2 coats of the XO V4, which is also very easy to apply, but takes some time to do it right. So after the ceramic coating, of course, we are finally done with the protection. Just do a final walk around, make sure it's good, no problem. And the very last thing that I did on this car was the trim, the exterior trim. I like to save that for last, and I don't use ceramic coating on the trim. I just find it's kind of finicky, it doesn't look quite right, and I find if I have to go back later in the year to do something to it, to do a restoration or adjust an area, with the ceramic coating, it's just, I don't like the way it works on the trim. And that's including the trim, the Geon trim, which I've used on a few different cars. I just use solution finish, touch it up, go back in a year or two if it needs it, and then you're fine. I don't really see the point. If the plastic's in that terrible of shape, I would probably recommend buying a new piece. But it took me a little over an hour to do the trim restoration on this car. Thankfully it wasn't terrible, but it does have a decent amount of trim on the outside. All right, so if you guys had your calculators, you might have calculated that it took me about 40 hours to do this car. And there are your answers for what took me the longest. Pretty much half of the time I spent was compounding. So the compounding was half of the work on this car. And to blow your minds even more, if your mind's not blown, think about the things that I didn't mention. Like the windows, the glass. I didn't talk about polishing the glass or removing water spots on glass or even putting a coating on the glass. I didn't do any of that in this detail. That's separate. I didn't do any interior. No wipe down, no vacuum, nothing. Pulled it in, got out. So I didn't do the interior, and I didn't do a lot of the jams. I didn't do like a coating on the jams or anything. I just did like a spray detailer for now. Maybe later I'll go back and focus on them, but I just didn't do that. I didn't have enough time. 40 hours was enough for me for a while. I'll come back and perfect the areas later, but that was just what I decided to do. So with that said, links are in the description. I hope this helped you guys if you're planning on detailing your own car. My channel obviously is mainly focused toward people who just like to do it themselves. You can do this yourself. It may not be professional grade, but if you take the right steps and learn as much as you can, it's easier than you think, just to keep your own car in good shape. So that is the reason for this video. I like to spread information, help you guys, and as always, feel free to comment below if I forgot anything, and I'll see you guys next time.